Welcome back everybody, my name is Nick930 and this is a review for the indie platforming game Cuphead. Cuphead is a brutally difficult 2D boss fighting game with basic platforming mechanics and a unique 1930s cartoon art style. To start off this review, let's take a brief look at Cuphead's story. In Cuphead, you play as a little Mickey Mouse looking character with a cup for a head. Him and his brother Mugman are both gambling in a casino and find themselves on a hot streak. When the devil catches on to this, he makes a bet with them that if they win, they'll get all the money in the casino, and if they lose, they'll be forced to give up their souls. After predictably losing to the devil, the two Cup Boys plead for their souls, and the devil decides that he'll spare the brothers if they find and defeat all the people that failed to pay their debts. This simple story helps set up the basic premise for Cuphead, and establishes a reason to get into several boss fights throughout the game. The story will take approximately 10 hours to get through depending on how well you can handle the many difficult bosses, and the ending is about as predictable as any cartoon from this time period. It stays true to the style and is executed very well, but aside from that, there's not really much else to say about the story. There's a lot we can say about the gameplay though. Contrary to what it may seem from looking at the screenshots of this game, Cuphead is barely a platforming game. In reality, it is almost completely focused on multi-phased boss battles, and you'll spend a majority of your time memorizing boss attack patterns and learning the best ways to counter them. The game is brutally difficult, and there only appears to be one difficulty that allows you to progress through the game. Switching your difficulty to the simple option will slow down the gameplay and remove several phases from the fights, but it will not allow you to collect the contract which is required to progress through the game. This seems like an entirely pointless feature. It could be seen as a way to practice against the bosses, but if it removes a majority of the boss phases, then what good is it? The game's regular difficulty is incredibly hard, and I found myself on the verge of tossing the controller out the window on basically every boss. I can't recall a single boss that I succeeded on in my first try, and I played through Bloodborne in its entirety. Many bosses will send out projectiles that require expert precision to avoid being hit, and health is severely limited. The game will give you 3 health by default, and this health cannot be regenerated throughout the duration of the fights. You can eventually purchase useful charm powers that can be equipped and will give you a boost to your overall health, but this will take away other, more useful charms like the Smoke Dash that can be used to dodge straight through enemy projectiles, something that feels like a must in several boss fights. Cuphead's primary form of attack is shooting magic out of his fingers, and you can eventually purchase different types of projectiles to fire out, that all have their uses in different situations. The standard pea shooter attack is an average damage rapid fire that can fire in straight lines. Then there's the charge shot that does extra damage but can only be fired one at a time. There's the roundabout attack that throws horseshoes in one direction and the projectiles will loop around and hit targets behind you. The spread shot acts as a rapid fire shotgun that is incredibly useful in close range, and then the homing shot makes it so you can fire without even having to aim with reduced damage. The heavy bouncing ball attack is probably the only attack I found useless, with a very small range and awkward controls making it impractical for almost all bosses. Like I mentioned before, there's multiple charms that can alter Cuphead's ability slightly. One charm increases his hearts from 3 to 4, another will cause his super meter to fill automatically, while the Smoke Dash will allow him to dodge without taking any damage. Finding the right combination of weapons and charms can mean the difference between a playable boss or an unplayable disaster. All of these charms and weapons can be purchased from a store in each of the 3 stages, and they require you to pay with gold coins, which can only be found from the occasional hub world NPCs or from run-and-gun platforming levels. Now, the run-and-gun levels are the only true platforming levels in the game. There's about 2 per stage, and they're generally pretty short. Each run-and-gun features many enemies and some tricky platforming that requires expert understanding of the controls and the level design. The first few levels aren't too bad, but those last 2 run-and-gun levels are brutally difficult, especially the level on the pier that features a moving octopus that you need to balance on while dodging pearls and flying parabolic shrimp. I must have tried this stupid level 20-some times, but changing some of my weapons and charms helped me, which is something you'll find yourself doing from time to time whenever you get stuck on something difficult in this game. Occasionally you'll encounter some pink projectiles or objects, and these can actually be parried, causing Cuphead to bounce up into the air while boosting his super meter. The parry move can be a real pain to work with though, and it's very unreliable. The hitbox for it is much smaller than it would appear from the character's animation, and missing a parry almost always results in damage taken to the player, which can be detrimental to the success of your fight. Some of the later boss fights require multiple parries in a row, and these are very close to impossible despite perfect timing and precision, so there's definitely room for improvement here. Also, bouncing up into the air after parrying leaves Cuphead extremely exposed, making it so it's almost not even worth doing if you don't have to. The super meter fills pretty rapidly already, and the only benefit other than that is that performing parries in a level count towards your score in the end. The power and super moves allow Cuphead to unleash his most powerful attacks. The playing cards at the bottom of the screen will slowly appear as you deal damage to enemies, and flipping a card over enables Cuphead to unleash a powerful charge attack with whichever weapon he has equipped at the time. Some of these charge-up attacks can feel pretty useless, and I found the only reliable one was the pea-shooter charge-up shot. If you hold off on using any of your power attacks and flip over all 5 cards, you'll have an opportunity to use a super attack. Now there's 3 super moves, each with their own varying usefulness depending on the battle. The first super is a horizontal beam that deals massive damage. The second is a temporary invincibility, but the effect is so crazy short that you'll never really get much use out of it. The third summons a large muscular Cuphead ghost that is difficult to control and will often fly off screen as you try to dodge enemy projectiles. You can unlock these super moves by completing mausoleums, which are small survival stages that force you to parry off multiple ghosts in a crypt and prevent the ghost from reaching the urn in the center. These are pretty straightforward bonus levels, but they really highlight the poor hitboxes and controls for the game's parry mechanic, and you often find yourself unable to parry as you try desperately to stop a single ghost that slipped by. Now that we've covered all the advanced moves and features, let's focus on what this game is all about with the actual boss fights themselves. Cuphead features 3 stages, each with about 5 or so bosses that should get more difficult throughout the game, but instead, they're all really difficult. Each boss will require quite a bit of trial and error, as you'll need to memorize each attack pattern and understand the best ways of dodging enemy attacks. Some attacks require you that you jump at the right time, while some require you to drop down low and duck. Some attacks even require you to parry to avoid touching the ground, and there's obviously a lot of frustration involved with those situations. Several bosses throughout the game also feature a unique retro airplane style battle where you fly around a little airplane that fires a rapid fire machine gun, and eventually you can unlock bombs that will lob in front of you and deal extra damage at a slower rate of fire. Instead of dodging, the plane can shrink down to a smaller plane that moves faster, but it does have a shorter firing range. The plane will also substitute your standard super moves with its own unique moves that are probably the most useful power and super moves in the game. A lot of your equipped charms are also useless in the plane segments because things like the smoke dash charm aren't very usable. But these boss fights can prove to be the most difficult in the game, requiring expert flying skills as you weave in and out of tons of projectiles like the old Raiden Tread games. The boss fight in the junkyard with the giant robot was especially difficult and probably took me the most tries due to the excessive length and overwhelming attack pattern. There's also a few other bosses that had some very poor designs, especially the Queen Bee that requires you to move up a vertically scrolling screen by jumping on platforms and avoiding projectiles. This boss would have been fine if your character wouldn't occasionally get stuck on platforms that were off screen up above. At least put in an on-screen indicator so the player knows where they are when they're off screen, like a little arrow pointing in the direction of Cuphead. Then there's the random number generator that every boss fight entails. Every battle has specific phases, and each phase has several different attacks that are randomly chosen each time you fight. This means that one player could potentially have an easier boss battle than you. Some combinations of attacks feel too overwhelming and the balancing just doesn't seem to be right. I feel as though it would have made more sense if they made the boss battles the same every time with only slight variations based on the player location to keep it from being exploited. The way it is now means you'll have several unavoidable situations where you're forced to take damage, and it can be very frustrating. Then there's a few other minor issues throughout, like projectiles not appearing on screen as they're hidden by level decor, or issues with the final boss during the snake attack phase, where you'll inexplicably take damage for no reason. I also had one of the bosses fly off screen randomly and die for absolutely no reason. But other than that, the bosses are all designed very well. Cuphead also features some local co-op, allowing you and a friend to play through the game in its entirety, with 2 little Cuphead characters jumping around and shooting at bosses simultaneously. Having 2 players at once will increase the difficulty of bosses though, requiring players to fire more at the bosses before they get knocked out. If a teammate is killed throughout the fight, you can actually parry their ghost before they fly off screen to revive them. But they'll still only have 1 health, and each subsequent death will have their ghost flying off the screen at a faster rate, making it impossible for their teammate to save them in time. Coins earned throughout the adventure are distributed to both players so they can freely purchase whatever power-up they want without having to share funds. Local co-op is a great way to experience the game, but it's a shame Cuphead doesn't offer any way to connect with friends online. This feels like a huge missed opportunity and would have made for a better experience overall. Finally, let's talk about the visuals, performance, and audio. Cuphead is a visual marvel with a beautiful attention to detail and a flawless execution of that classic 1930s cartoon style. The music is expertly done and unique for each stage, featuring marches, swing jazz, and various other songs you'd expect to hear from an old school cartoon. The sound effects are all low quality to match the style, and the sound is great. Each stage is bustling with background activity, and the colors are all muted to help capture that colored in frame aesthetic. Every boss is filled with personality, from their unique attacks to their great character design and animations. The game's biggest draw is this art style, and the art directors absolutely nailed it in every way. In terms of performance, I had absolutely no problems throughout my entire playthrough. The game ran as smoothly as possible with the settings as high as I could set them, though honestly there really wasn't much to bump up to begin with. Cuphead is a brutally difficult platformer with a heavy emphasis on boss fights, all wrapped up in a unique 1930s cartoon art style. The style is captured perfectly with beautifully arranged music and solid gameplay, but the difficulty scaling may turn off a lot of unseasoned platformer players. The game will take you about 9 to 10 hours to rush through, but perhaps longer depending on how well you handle the boss encounters. And if you're suicidal, you can always try and earn an S rating in every stage, or the difficult pacifist achievement that has you completing those few platformer levels without killing a single enemy. There's even an expert difficulty for those that just hate themselves. The game's local co-op functions as expected, and the presentation and performance are flawless. You can pick up Cuphead for $20 on the Xbox One, Windows 10 Store, and Steam. Thank you all for watching. I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, make sure you like the video and subscribe for more content every day.